Ever wonder if that brilliant idea sparking in your mind is truly yours and yours alone,
Mm,
or if it's somehow, connected to the buzz of the world around you?
yeah.
Or maybe you've been part of a group where the collective brain power felt like,
Yeah.
wow, it unlocks something no one person could have on their own.
Oh, absolutely. That collective energy. It's a fascinating starting point, isn't it? Really getting to the core of where our thoughts even come from
Mhm.
and how they evolve.
Exactly.
Are we each just a solo inventor in our own inner world?
Or is there some kind of constant, maybe invisible collaboration happening?
Right.
That's the heart of what we're exploring in this deep dive. We're uh, digging into whether thinking is purely private.
We're inherently shared.
Yeah, inherently shared.
Yeah.
And we're also asking if new ideas thrive better in a completely smooth, agreeable environment.
Or do they actually need some pushback, some friction maybe, to truly take shape?
Mhm. And finally, this big one. Can a community, a whole group, actually think together?
Like a single entity.
Yeah. And if so, what does that even look like?
Well, to really try and get our heads around this, we've pulled from a pretty diverse range of places. It's quite a mix.
Right.
We've looked at mindfulness practices, how they encourage us to just observe our own minds,
Right.
and contrasted that with philosophical ideas about like the absence of thought,
Hmm.
and even considered how our brains sort of reconstruct our sense of cause and effect.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then we looked at some seemingly unrelated things like Machiavellian leadership.
Machiavelli, yeah.
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 And the dynamics of successful teams, but also alongside really introspective concepts like loving kindness meditation. It's quite the spread.
It really is. It makes you think, could the next truly original idea, bubble up not in some isolated lab somewhere,
Uh-huh.
but during a casual chat? Maybe among friends at like a neighborhood zine club over coffee.
Totally possible. Or what happens when you give just a single sentence, right? A shared starting point to 10 different artists and just see the wildly different things that sparks.
It really makes you question the whole nature of where thoughts begin and how they grow, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So let's tackle that first big question. Is thinking fundamentally an individual act?
Okay.
Because when we look at practices like mindfulness and different kinds of meditation, the focus seems very much on tuning in into
Mm.
our own internal world.
Right. Let's unpack that a bit. Sources on, say, mindfulness meditation talk about just being present with your thoughts.
Hmm. Observing them,
Yeah, observing them as they come and go without judgment, without getting carried away.
just watching the stream.
It's all about cultivating this really deep inner awareness. That definitely feels like a solo mission,
It really does. You're becoming the observer of your own consciousness. And then you have these fascinating concepts from Zen Buddhism,
Oh, yeah.
like Wu Nyan, which is often translated as no thought, and Hishiri, or non-thinking.
Nothing.
Yeah, which we found mention in Wikipedia's entry on meditation. And there, the focus isn't even really on the content of your thoughts,
Uh-huh.
but more on the underlying nature of mind itself. Kind of moving beyond that stream of conscious thinking. It's a really deep dive into the individual experience.
So it's like going beyond just what you're thinking about
Yeah.
to the very act of thinking, and sometimes even beyond that.
Exactly.
Wow, that really underscores the intensely personal nature of our inner lives.
It does. But, and here's the twist, even within this seemingly private space, there are subtle hints that external factors are still playing a role.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about the idea from mind hacks that our sense of cause and effect, how we figure out why things happen, isn't always a direct observation.
Right.
Our brains often reconstruct those connections after the fact.
Oh, okay.
So this suggests that our understanding of the world, even those aha moments that feel so uniquely ours, they might actually be built on interpretations that have been shaped by our past experiences, by our interactions with everything around us.
So, hang on. Even when I feel like I've had this completely internal original thought, the way I learn to process information, the way I see connections, that could have been shaped by external stuff I'm not even aware of.
Precisely. And if we connect this to that quote we found from Henry Miller,
Oh, yeah.
one's destination is never a place, but rather a new way of seeing things.
I like that.
It makes you wonder, right? Are these new ways of seeing solely generated from within?
Or are they often sparked, maybe nurtured, through our engagement with the world, with other people?
Exactly. Could a casual remark in that zine club chat plant a seed?
And that seed blossoms into a totally new way of understanding a problem you've been wrestling with internally for ages.
It could. It definitely gives you pause.
Okay, so let's switch gears a bit. Let's explore this idea of friction. Do ideas actually need friction to grow? It almost sounds wrong, doesn't it?
It does. You'd naturally assume, like, a supportive, harmonious vibe would be the best ground for creativity.
Totally. Smooth sailing.
But some of our sources paint well, a more complex picture. Let's take Machiavelli, for instance.
Okay, Machiavelli again. How does he fit?
Well, in 15 Lessons from Machiavelli, he famously argues it's more effective for a ruler to be feared than loved.
Right, the classic line.
Because love, he says, is often fickle, but fear provides a more consistent foundation for control. Now, how could that connect to developing ideas?
Well, if we think of fear here, not as literal terror,
Right, not terror.
but maybe as, like, the anticipation of tough questions, rigorous scrutiny, challenge.
Okay, yeah.
Then maybe Machiavelli is suggesting that a lack of just, unquestioning acceptance can actually be good for shaping stronger ideas.
That's a really interesting parallel.
Like, if you know your concepts are going to be really put to the test, you might be more diligent, more prepared to defend them.
I think that makes sense. And Machiavelli's focus on effectiveness against moral considerations. You know, the ends justifying the means in certain situations. That could also be relevant in innovation, perhaps. Maybe a willingness to ruthlessly evaluate, challenge assumptions, even if it feels uncomfortable or goes against the grain. Maybe that's needed for truly groundbreaking stuff.
So it's almost like subjecting your new ideas to a stress test.
Yeah, exactly.
And if they can withstand that pressure, that critical evaluation, they're probably going to be more resilient, more impactful.
Precisely. And we see a kind of similar vibe echoed in that 42.pdf document.
How so?
It basically says anything hindering a team's performance should be fair game to eliminate. And they specifically call out sacred cows.
The sacred cows, don't touch those.
Right, but this implies you should touch them. It emphasizes that need for critical evaluation within a group, a willingness to create friction against the established norms, the assumptions that might be holding things back.
So it's about not being afraid to question the way things have always been done, challenging the status quo.
Definitely. But then we have the Buddhist concept of metta, loving kindness meditation.
Okay, that sounds like the opposite of friction.
It does, doesn't it? We saw this in 11 meditation styles explained. It's all about cultivating empathy, positivity, acceptance towards yourself and others. So how does that fit in?
Yeah, that feels like a clash.
Well, maybe it's the crucial balance, you know? While some friction, some critical evaluation might be essential for refining ideas, weeding out the weak spots, maybe a foundation of acceptance and open-mindedness is equally vital for just generating ideas in the first place.
Okay. So if people feel their first thoughts, especially the weird ones,
Yeah, the really out there ones.
if they feel those will just get shot down immediately with negativity or harsh criticism,
They might just keep them to themselves. They might not share them at all.
so it's like a two-part process, maybe? You need that initial spark, that openness, a safe space for those early fragile ideas to even come out. But then you also need the rigorous challenge, the critical feedback to mold those sparks into something really innovative and effective.
Exactly. I like that. Think of it like a blacksmith, maybe.
Okay.
They need the initial heat, right? And a certain amount of force, the hammer, to shape the raw metal.
Yeah.
But they also need skill and precision so they don't just shatter it. The friction of the hammer is necessary, but it has to be applied thoughtfully.
That's a really powerful analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's tackle our final question. Can a community actually think together?
Yeah, this is where it feels like we move beyond just individual psychology, doesn't it, into something bigger.
It does. And our sources seem to offer some compelling examples of how this might happen.
Like the Solidarity movement in Poland that came up in a checklist for ending tyranny.
Right. Their reliance on creating their own alternative institutions.
Like underground printing presses, independent newsletters.
Exactly. To get communication flowing, share information between different cities, that was absolutely crucial, wasn't it?
Totally crucial. It bypassed the state control.
So that ability to create their own network allowed the community to act in a coordinated way. It's almost like a collective consciousness emerged with a shared understanding of their goals and how to get there.
Precisely. It enabled that shared understanding, that coordinated response on a massive scale.
Mhm.
And similarly, organized2win.pdf talks about mobilizing local people
Mhm.
and really leveraging the existing social networks of members, their friends, families, wider connections.
Right.
That shows how a community can collectively act and exert influence just by tapping into how interconnected everyone already is.
It's like the power of distributed action.
Yeah.
Individual efforts, but aligned by a shared vision, linked by communication, that can create a really powerful collective force.
And then we get into Gramsci, his prison
Okay,
notebooks.
Gramsci, this sounds deep.
It is. He delves into how intellectual and moral leadership within a dominant social group, what he calls a historical bloc, involves these really complex interrelationships and how hegemony gets established through various societal structures.
Okay, hegemony. Let's unpack that word a bit.
Right. So in this context, it basically refers to how a certain set of ideas becomes the dominant, widely accepted norm. It shapes how people think, how they understand the world, often without them even realizing it.
Got it. So Gramsci is saying a community's shared way of seeing things isn't just random.
No, not all.
It's actively shaped, maintained by different forces in society, creating this kind of dominant worldview.
Exactly. And within that, he also talks about traditional intellectuals,
Okay.
people who see themselves as having this historical continuity, this kind of spirit of core, like a shared identity connecting them to thinkers from the past.
Interesting. So that suggests a form of collective thinking that stretches across generations.
Yeah, like an ongoing intellectual conversation through time.
Like the ideas and insights of the past keep informing and shaping the thinking of the present, creating this continuous thread of collective thought within a community.
Exactly. And we even see an example within political organizations in his work,
Oh, yeah.
where, say, a central faction might absorb and integrate dissenting viewpoints from other factions.
Well,
It shows how a collective entity can actually evolve its thinking through internal friction, those initial disagreements, the debates leading eventually to a more refined, unified consensus.
so even within a smaller group,
Mm-hmm.
that process of debate, working through different perspectives,
Yeah.
that can lead to a stronger, more evolved collective understanding.
Absolutely. And one last piece, the idea from the Thinking in Systems primer
Right.
about how systems modelers, when they build models, inevitably reflect their own worldview, their biases.
Oh,
We
no.
can kind of extend that, right? To the idea that a community's shared model of the world, its underlying assumptions, beliefs, values, profoundly shapes its collective thinking, how it sees things, how it responds.
Wow. It all seems to point back to this idea that
Ah,
while our individual thoughts are undeniably important, they're also just deeply interwoven with our social context. We're constantly being influenced by and contributing to the collective intelligence of our communities, whether we realize it or not.
that sums it up really well. So, circling back to our initial questions,
Yeah.
the evidence we've looked at suggests thinking isn't just a private act. It's profoundly influenced by external factors, by our interactions.
Right. And friction.
Friction, that critical evaluation, that challenge seems like a vital catalyst for growth, for refining ideas, though it needs balance, right? With that open-mindedness, that willingness to embrace the new.
Okay. And communities thinking together.
Yes, it seems communities can indeed think together through shared communication, organization, and that ongoing evolution of collective perspectives and understandings.
So the next time you find yourself brainstorming with a group, or maybe even just watching how ideas spread and change in a community,
Mm-hmm.
take a moment.
Mm-hmm.
Consider this really intricate dance between your own internal thoughts and that collective intelligence that's constantly shaping and reshaping how we see the world.
Yeah.
Could it be that the biggest breakthroughs don't come from isolated genius, but from actively engaging with diverse perspectives, maybe even the productive friction within the communities we're part of?
That's a really powerful thought to leave with. And it brings us to one final question, maybe for everyone listening to consider.
Okay.
What kind of thinking do you believe ultimately holds the most potential? Is it that solitary flash of insight, the aha moment alone?
Or is it the slow, collaborative evolution of an idea within a group